The mind is plastic. Every thought you choose to dwell on strengthens neural circuits. Every affirmation you make, if it's aligned with behavior and biology, wires your brain to perceive, act, and adapt in more functional ways. So when we talk about things to tell ourselves daily, we're not just engaging in feel-good talk. We're designing mental training protocols that shape neurochemistry, hormonal output, and even gene expression. Start every day by telling yourself this: I am in control of where my attention goes. This isn't motivational fluff. It's neuroscience. Attention is the entry point of neuroplasticity. Whatever you attend to, your brain will build circuitry around. The prefrontal cortex, especially the anterior cingulate, helps steer that attention. If you start the day by reminding yourself that your focus is a tool, not a victim of circumstance, you reclaim your cognitive sovereignty. When you're distracted, you're essentially handing over your neuroplastic potential to the external world. Say it, then act on it. Your focus is a muscle, and it can be trained. Then say this: my body influences my mind. This goes beyond posture or breathing, though both are fundamental. When you inhale longer than you exhale, you increase sympathetic tone. That's arousal, alertness. When you reverse it, longer exhales, you tap into parasympathetic tone. That's calm, grounded, focused. You can shift your mental state by manipulating your physiology immediately, without waiting. You're not at the mercy of thoughts. You're the conductor of the nervous system that generates them. Tell yourself this, and remind your body to lead the way. Walk, breathe, move with intention. The mind follows the body's lead more often than the other way around. Next, repeat this daily. Progress over perfection. The brain thrives on dopamine, but not the kind that spikes and crashes from external rewards. The most sustainable dopamine system is driven by internal progress recognition. When you acknowledge that you're slightly better today than yesterday, you reinforce the dopamine reward prediction error system, a powerful mechanism that motivates consistent action. Telling yourself that progress, not perfection, is the goal taps directly into your reward system. It prevents burnout. It ensures that your brain doesn't associate growth with anxiety, but with empowerment. Another, stress is not my enemy, it's my teacher. From a biological standpoint, acute stress releases adrenaline, norepinephrine, and cortisol, not to destroy you, but to sharpen you. Short bursts of stress improve memory consolidation, immune response, and focus. What's damaging is chronic, unbuffered stress without tools to regulate it. The key isn't to eliminate stress, but to reframe it. Stress is a signal, and when harnessed, it becomes the portal to adaptation. Your brain grows under stress if followed by recovery. Your resilience is formed not by avoiding pressure, but by moving through it with intention. Here's another powerful one. My environment shapes me, and I shape it. From light exposure, to temperature, to social interaction, your surroundings dictate your biology. Early morning sunlight on your eyes resets your circadian rhythm, lowers cortisol at night, and boosts dopamine. Cold exposure activates epinephrine, boosts metabolism, and elevates mood. The people you interact with affect your neurochemistry, for better or worse. You are not a passive player. You have agency. Choose environments that reinforce who you're becoming. Engineer your space to reflect your identity. Say it until you believe it. Your environment is a tool, not a trap. And finally, I don't need motivation. I need consistency. Here's why. Motivation is unreliable. It's a transient emotional state driven by spikes in dopamine or external cues. What your brain respects is repetition. Repetition builds automaticity. The point where your actions become reflexive, driven by the basal ganglia, not deliberation. Every time you show up, even with low energy, you tell your nervous system, this matters. Over time, the friction drops, habits form, and soon, identity follows behavior. If you wait to feel ready, you've already delayed neuroplastic change. Show up regardless of mood. The brain adapts to consistency far faster than to inspiration. You can tell yourself these things every day, and they will work, not because they're magical affirmations, but because they align with how your brain and body operate. These aren't mantras, they're tools. And tools only work if you use them. So say them, act on them, and allow biology to work in your favor. Attention is the gatekeeper of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself through experience. Every single day, the circuits you strengthen or weaken are shaped by what you choose to focus on. The brain doesn't change in response to everything you encounter. It changes in response to what you focus on with intention. This is not just a psychological statement, it's a biological law. When you place deliberate attention on something, specific neural circuits in your prefrontal cortex, parietal lobe, and sensory regions become active. If that attention is sustained, those circuits begin to fire in repeated patterns. And neurons that fire together wire together. That's Hebb's rule, one of the most fundamental principles in neuroscience. But there's more to it. Neuroplasticity is a limited time offer. Each day, your brain is most malleable when it's alert, focused, and slightly challenged. If you're distracted, multitasking, or passively absorbing information, plasticity is greatly reduced. This is why your attention is so critical. The brain doesn't just record life, it rewires itself based on what you pay attention to and how intensely. If you spend the majority of your day switching between social media, emails, and short-form content, what you're training is not just attention fragmentation, it's a scattered neural architecture. Your brain becomes excellent at being distracted. That becomes the default mode, reinforced by dopamine released in small, unstructured bursts. But if you train your attention on a single task, intentionally and repeatedly, your brain begins to favor depth over distraction. Your cognitive endurance increases, your memory improves, your performance elevates. The basal forebrain, which releases acetylcholine, plays a major role in this process. When you pay attention to something, acetylcholine is released at the synapses relevant to that task. It acts like a spotlight, highlighting the neurons involved so that changes to those circuits are prioritized. In essence, acetylcholine tells the brain, this matters. Strengthen these connections. But if attention is divided, that signal becomes weak and scattered. The brain doesn't know what to reinforce, so you end up consuming information without integrating it. You become aware of many things, but master of none. This is why attention is not a luxury, it's a biological imperative. There's also the role of norepinephrine, released from the locus ceruleus. This neuromodulator boosts alertness and readiness. It signals urgency and helps lock attention onto a target. When norepinephrine and acetylcholine are both present, meaning you're alert and focused, the brain is primed for change. This is the state in which neuroplasticity occurs most efficiently, and this state is not dependent on motivation. It's trainable. You can build the capacity to enter high attention states by removing distractions, setting intentions, and challenging yourself with tasks that require depth. Your ability to focus is not fixed, it's plastic. The more you train it, the more capable your brain becomes at sustaining attention over time. Think of it like a spotlight that you can widen or narrow. Most people live with that spotlight flickering across everything around them, never fully resting long enough to reshape anything meaningful. But when you narrow that beam, when you commit to a task, a goal, a practice, your brain follows suit. You carve grooves of excellence through the power of sustained focus. And this doesn't have to take hours. Even 90 minutes a day of deep, uninterrupted focus is enough to create long-term structural changes in the brain. But it requires discipline. It requires setting boundaries around your attention the same way you would protect your time, energy, or physical health. One of the most effective ways to train attention is through visual anchoring. Your eyes are part of your central nervous system, and where your gaze goes, your attention tends to follow. By keeping your eyes steady and reducing visual scanning, you engage circuits in the frontal cortex that stabilize cognitive focus. This is why practices like reading, writing, or solving complex problems are so powerful for rewiring the brain. They demand not just mental focus, but visual stillness. The more still your eyes, the more stable your mental spotlight. Another strategy is deliberate goal setting. When you set a clear intention for your attention, what to focus on, why it matters, and what success looks like, you give your brain a target. The brain thrives on goal-directed behavior. It doesn't want to just wander aimlessly. Even 5 minutes of setting clear intentions in the morning can prime your brain to attend to what matters most. Without that direction, You become vulnerable to the loudest stimulus in the environment rather than the most meaningful one. Attention is the beginning of all change. Whether you're trying to learn a skill, overcome anxiety, improve memory, or build a better version of yourself, it starts with where you place your focus. The circuits you activate consistently become the circuits that define your identity. Attention isn't just a cognitive tool, it's a biological force that shapes the structure and function of your brain, day after day. The relationship between the body and the mind is not just philosophical, it's biological and mechanical. What your body does sends direct signals to your brain, shaping how you feel, how you think, and how you perform. The body is not simply the servant of the mind, it is the co-creator of every emotional, cognitive, and behavioral state you experience. If you want to influence your mind, you don't always have to start with thoughts. You can start with posture, breathing, movement, temperature exposure, light, and even eye position. The nervous system listens to all of it, constantly adapting its internal landscape based on the external signals the body provides. One of the most immediate ways the body shapes the mind is through breath. The pattern of your breathing determines whether your body enters a state of calm or agitation. Inhaling increases heart rate and raises sympathetic tone. Exhaling slows the heart rate and activates the parasympathetic nervous system. When you inhale longer than you exhale, you generate alertness. When you exhale longer than you inhale, you signal safety and calm. These shifts are not subtle. They dramatically affect your ability to focus, relax, engage socially, or make decisions. Just by changing how you breathe, you change your neurochemical state. This is why controlled breathing is a powerful tool in high-stakes situations. It gives you access to the control panel of your nervous system without needing to rely on thoughts or emotion. Posture is another direct feedback channel. When you sit or stand upright with your chest open and spine aligned, the brain interprets this as a position of confidence and alertness. Slouched posture, on the other hand, compresses the diaphragm, reduces oxygen intake, and can activate networks associated with low mood or learned helplessness. The mind reads the body constantly and creates meaning based on what it senses. This is not abstract. It's grounded in proprioception, interoception, and mechanoreception. Your brain is reading signals from muscles, joints, and pressure receptors to gauge how safe, strong, and prepared you are. That data feeds into emotional and cognitive systems in real time. In other words, how you carry your body shapes how your brain perceives the world. Movement is another powerful modulator of mental state. Physical movement activates. Stress is often framed as something to avoid, a negative force that disrupts health, clarity, and performance. But this is only part of the story. Stress, when understood and harnessed properly, can become one of the most powerful drivers of growth, adaptation, and resilience. From a biological perspective, stress is not inherently bad. It's a signal, a neurochemical and physiological response that tells the brain and body to prepare, to engage, to adapt. The key lies in how the stress is interpreted, buffered, and followed by recovery. This combination determines whether stress becomes damaging or developmental. At the core of the stress response are chemicals like cortisol, adrenaline, and norepinephrine. When released in the right context and in the right amount, they sharpen your senses, heighten your awareness, and mobilize energy. These substances prepare the body for action by increasing heart rate, directing blood flow to the muscles, and enhancing the brain's ability to focus. In fact, short bursts of stress increase mental clarity and improve memory formation. The brain, particularly the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, becomes more engaged under acute stress. The challenge isn't the presence of stress, it's the chronicity of stress without adequate recovery. Stress triggers adaptation through a process known as hormesis. This is the biological principle that a small dose of a challenge or toxin makes an organism stronger. Exercise is a perfect example. When you lift weights, you're literally damaging muscle fibers. That damage is a stressor, but in response, the body rebuilds the muscle stronger than it was before. This same principle applies to mental and emotional stress. Exposure to challenges, when done voluntarily and followed by recovery, leads to greater resilience, more capacity for discomfort, and a higher threshold for performance under pressure. The nervous system becomes more efficient at handling future challenges. This is not a metaphor. It's a structural change in the brain and body. The brain regions most impacted by stress, the amygdala, hippocampus, and prefrontal cortex, respond differently depending on context. When stress is perceived as controllable, these areas communicate in a way that enhances learning, memory, and emotional regulation. The individual feels a sense of agency, which transforms the stressor into a stimulus for growth. But when stress is seen as overwhelming or uncontrollable, these same brain regions fall into a feedback loop of fear, anxiety, and shutdown. The biology is not fixed, it's responsive to perception. You can train your brain to reinterpret stress signals as opportunities rather than threats. One of the most profound effects of stress, when used properly, is that it reveals the edges of your capacity. It shows you where the limits are, not to stop you, but to give you data. That information becomes a roadmap. With each encounter, your nervous system gains information. What works, what doesn't, what can be tolerated, what needs training. Over time, this leads to what researchers call stress inoculation. Just like a vaccine introduces a small challenge to build immunity, exposure to controlled stress builds neural and psychological toughness. You don't just cope better, you become stronger. This process also engages neuroplasticity. When you go through a stressful experience, especially one that demands problem-solving or emotional regulation, your brain forms new connections. It adapts to help you handle similar situations better next time. This is how people build emotional resilience, strategic thinking, and even spiritual growth. The discomfort creates the space for expansion. The brain doesn't grow in comfort, it grows in challenge. The synapses that fire during stress are the ones that get modified during recovery. That means growth doesn't happen during the stress itself, it happens after, when your system has processed the experience. Deliberate exposure to stress can be one of the most effective training tools available. Cold exposure, intense physical training, breath holds, public speaking, all are forms of voluntary stress that condition the nervous system to become less reactive and more adaptive. When these experiences are paired with calm recovery periods, the body integrates them into a broader resilience template. Heart rate variability increases, cortisol regulation improves, confidence grows. The brain starts to encode the message that discomfort is not danger, it's development. This doesn't mean all stress is beneficial. Chronic, unrelenting stress without control or recovery leads to burnout, inflammation, and breakdown. But that's not the kind of stress that leads to growth. Growth-oriented stress is intentional, time-limited, and followed by rest. It's the kind that pushes the boundary just enough to cause adaptation without collapse. You learn to ride the edge of your capacity, and each time you do, that edge moves further out. Stress, when framed properly, becomes a portal. It invites the nervous system to expand. It forces the brain to reconfigure. It challenges identity, discipline, and belief systems. And when met with the right tools and mindset, it initiates transformation. You become not just someone who can handle more, but someone who is fundamentally more capable. That's the true power of stress. Not as something to fear, but as something to respect, utilize, and grow through. The nervous system doesn't change through intensity, it changes through consistency. One of the most common misconceptions about human performance and behavior is that motivation drives action. In reality, it's consistent behavior that rewires the brain and creates long-lasting change. Motivation is a transient state, fleeting, unreliable, and subject to countless variables like sleep, hormones, environment, and emotional state. It might get you started, but it cannot be the foundation. The real engine of change is repetition. When an action is repeated over and over, regardless of emotional state, it gets encoded into neural circuitry. The brain learns what is important, not by what feels good, but by what is repeated. The process of building any skill, habit, or transformation requires the cooperation of brain regions. Early on, the prefrontal cortex responsible for conscious decision-making and willpower has to carry the load. It evaluates what to do, why to do it, and how to do it. But the goal is to move that behavior from the prefrontal cortex into the basal ganglia. That's the part of the brain responsible for habitual action. And the only way that transfer happens is through consistent repetition. The brain needs evidence that an action is worth automating. It needs to see the behavior show up across different days, energy levels, and emotional states. Neurons communicate through synaptic connections, and the more frequently a pathway is used, the stronger that connection becomes. This is the biological basis of the phrase, "What fires together wires together." Consistency increases the strength and speed of those connections. It reduces the cognitive effort required to perform the task. What was once difficult or unfamiliar becomes easier, smoother, and eventually automatic. The transformation happens not in one breakthrough moment, but through dozens, hundreds, and sometimes thousands of repetitions. Each one etches the behavior deeper into the fabric of the brain. Waiting for motivation to act is a form of neurological paralysis. It trains the brain to expect a specific emotional state before moving forward. This reduces adaptability and increases reliance on external conditions. But when you take action, regardless of internal state, when you perform the behavior tired, unmotivated, or distracted, you teach the brain a different lesson. You teach it that behavior is not conditional. You teach it that movement can precede emotion, that discipline can override hesitation. This builds neural robustness. It also builds psychological resilience. There's also a reward mechanism tied to consistency. Each time you complete a task, even something small, your brain releases a pulse of dopamine, especially if you attach meaning to the effort. That dopamine is not just a feel-good chemical. It enhances attention, learning, and motivation for future behavior. So when you show up consistently and you mentally reward that consistency, you create a feedback loop that drives deeper engagement. The behavior becomes associated with reward, not just the outcome. This is a critical shift. It's what keeps people going when results are slow or invisible. The brain tracks patterns. It prioritizes what is regular, not what is intense. Think of brushing your teeth. You don't need to be motivated to do it every night. It's embedded into your identity because it's been done thousands of times without question. The same can be true for writing, training, learning, meditating, or any other action. The repetition creates identity, and once something becomes part of who you are, the effort to maintain it drops significantly. The brain conserves energy by turning repeated behaviors into habits, and habits into identity. This is how consistency leads to transformation. It changes the neural default. This is how consistency leads to transformation. It changes the neural default. What was once a choice becomes automatic. What was once effort becomes rhythm. And once that shift happens, you no longer need to wrestle with yourself every day. You don't wake up wondering if you'll follow through. You simply do. This is not the result of one motivated decision. It's the result of thousands of consistent ones. Sleep, nutrition, and environment all influence brain function, but none of them override the power of consistency. It is the most potent tool for long-term change. It doesn't matter if the session was perfect. It matters that the session happened. It doesn't matter if the writing flowed easily. It matters that the writing got done. Each time you show up, even without motivation, you reinforce the circuitry that makes future action easier. This builds momentum, and momentum, once established, becomes self-perpetuating. The nervous system respects consistency. It adapts to what you do often, not what you do occasionally, not what you do when you feel like it, but what you do no matter what. This is how behavior becomes identity. And identity is the most stable form of transformation.